If you can't give me a grandchild, then we should consider getting a divorce. Fine, I understand. However, I am pregnant. Huh? I'm a homemaker in my 30s, living with my husband Jones, who works in an office. I first met Jones while working at a company related to the food industry. As we interacted over various transactions, I found myself drawn to his occasional smiles. Taking the initiative, I proposed a relationship. Initially rejected because he had a girlfriend, he later approached me a month later, having broken up with her. Apparently, since my confession, he had started thinking about me. And when his girlfriend sensed the change, she asked if he had found someone else. Upon nodding, they agreed to part ways, and that's what I heard. Feeling guilty for causing their breakup, Jones reassured me, saying it probably wouldn't have lasted long anyway. After 3 years of dating, we got married. Jones expressed his desire to have children after marriage, asking me to stay at home to support him and our future family. At that time, I wasn't enthusiastic about continuing my job in a somewhat toxic company, so I quit to become a full-time homemaker. Transitioning from a working woman to a homemaker was more challenging than I expected, but our newlywed life was smooth, and I was consistently happy. Every day was filled with joy, and the absence of any mother-in-law issues was a significant relief. Jones's family home was just a 10-minute walk from our apartment, adding to the overall harmony of our lives. Initially, I was concerned that his parents might frequently visit and hassle me, but those fears were unfounded. His parents turned out to be very kind. Whenever I had a small question, they would come all the way to our home to explain it gently and kindly. Surprisingly, they never complained about our childlessness. Instead, they expressed sentiments like, "You are even dearer than a grandchild. We only have men in our family, and I always wanted a daughter. Please let us pamper you like our real daughter." I grew very fond of Jones's mother, Carol. Although Jones's father, Tom, was a man of few words, I found him to be reliable and trustworthy. However, this heartwarming relationship only lasted for the first few years. As time passed, the attitude of his once kind parents began to change. Gradually, Tom became even more reserved, and Carol underwent a significant transformation. I started suspecting her of having a dual personality, or perhaps this was her true self all along. To quantify her change, if she was at a plus 100 before, now she seemed to be at minus 100. The warmth and kindness were replaced by a harsh demeanor. Living nearby, Carol started visiting our house frequently, nagging me in Joan's absence. She repeatedly urged me to show her the face of my grandchild soon. Emphasizing that it's a wife's duty, she rushed me to have a child, stating, "Children are a gift from heaven. You don't have to try hard. You'll conceive naturally when the time comes, so don't rush." Furthermore, Carol began pressuring me by citing other families, saying things like, "The family over there recently had a baby, and the woman next door is also pregnant. What about you?" Regardless of how much Carol pressed me for a grandchild, it seemed meaningless if Jones wasn't ready. At the start of our marriage, he expressed a desire for children, but within a year, he had completely lost interest. Even my attempts to initiate were met with declines, with responses like, "I'm tired, maybe next time," or "Don't interrupt my gaming." Despite my attempts to explain this to Carol, she seemed not to understand and continued to pressure me, increasing my stress each day. Unable to endure her relentless pressure any longer, I confided in Jones about the strain I was facing to have a grandchild. His response was somewhat reluctant. "I don't think we need to rush this, you know." However, he agreed to increase our intimate time together. Despite our joint efforts, conceiving proved elusive. Throughout this period, Carol continued hurling insults, blaming our inability to conceive on me not trying hard enough. At times, I suspected that the stress accumulated from her constant pressure might be affecting our chances of conceiving. Unable to withstand the pressure any longer, we as a couple decided to undergo fertility treatments. Thinking I could finally breathe a sigh of relief, I found myself faced with a new problem, Jones. Since starting fertility treatments, he became increasingly cold, retreating to his room to play video games upon returning from work and ignoring my attempts at conversation. While his irritability over my spending on hobby supplies and taking out his work stress on me might have been tolerable, he escalated his behavior. He would quickly lose his temper, repeatedly saying one-sided things like, "Who do you think is providing for you, you freeloader?" This continued despite my efforts to explain that I quit my job based on his wishes. One day, when Jones should have been going to work, I found him playing video games at home. When I asked him about going to work, he casually replied, "I quit," shocking me. Inquiring about the reason behind this decision, I received no explanation. His only response was to lose his temper, bluntly stating that it's none of my business. I was disgusted by his uncooperative attitude, but I felt there was nothing I could do since he had already quit his job. I wasn't initially panicked about finances, thinking we could manage somehow by relying on unemployment benefits and dipping into our home savings for a while. However, the realization that he had no intention of finding a new job began to stress me out. Jones, having quit his job, spent his days at home from morning to evening. I hoped he would go out once in a while, but gaming seemed to be his only hobby. Aside from the occasional trip to the convenience store for cigarettes, he was constantly immersed in video games. Compared to when he was a working man, the time we spent face-to-face as a couple increased dramatically. In the early days of our relationship, I might have seen this as an opportunity for more affectionate moments. However, with him going from a +100 to a -100, much like Carol, this increase in face-to-face time meant that our arguments as a couple were also on the rise. Gradually, we realized that even simple conversations were becoming stressful, and we stopped conversing almost entirely. I began questioning the point of continuing this married life. The once promising relationship now seemed to be reaching its limit, prompting me to contemplate finding a way to escape the current situation. One day, finally fed up with Jones loafing around at home, playing games all day like a child, I confronted him. I told him, "You're not a kid. Stop playing games all the time and start looking for a job." To my surprise, his response was unexpected. He casually mentioned, "Oh, by the way, my mom told me that if we can't have a baby, we should get a divorce." In an unexpected turn of events, I found myself feeling grateful to Carol. Despite planning to share the news of my pregnancy with Jones that night, I decided against it. Now, it seemed like the right decision. With this revelation, I saw an opportunity to escape from both Carol and Jones. Nonchalantly, I said, "Okay, got it. Here are the divorce papers." I pulled out the already filled-out divorce papers from a drawer and handed them to him. Clearly not expecting me to agree to the divorce, let alone produce ready-to-sign papers, Jones was taken aback, stuttering and freezing on the spot. His usual domineering attitude was nowhere to be seen. He looked dumbfounded. Observing his reaction, Jones seemed to want to say something. However, convinced that he couldn't disregard what his mother had suggested, he went ahead and signed the divorce papers. Continuously sneaking glances at me, he seemed unsettled. Later, we gathered to discuss matters like property division. Surprisingly, we didn't have much in terms of assets to worry about. In reality, Jones often splurged on his hobbies. Not only did he play games at home, but he also seemed to have spent a significant amount of money at game centers. Despite his previous complaints about my spending habits, it turned out that he was the one with more reckless financial behavior. The concept of saving money was non-existent for him. He hadn't saved any money since before we got married, and nothing had changed even after our marriage. Consequently, we had no assets to divide. Realizing this, I thought the discussion was over. Despite Jones insisting that a considerable amount of savings in a passbook should be part of the property division, I clarified that these savings were accumulated before our marriage and therefore not subject to property division. Watching his face turn progressively paler, I informed him, "Unfortunately, the condo is in my name, so you have no rights to it. Moreover, I've already put it up for sale, so you can't live here anymore. It would be a nuisance, so please leave immediately." With a smile, I added, "Besides, I thought this condo would become too small in the future, so I have been saving up for a new home." Before marrying Jones, saving was a hobby of mine. Even with a regular job, I had managed to save quite a bit. I used those savings to buy the condo during a time of rapid advancement, meaning it wouldn't be subject to property division this time. He seemed unaware of this fact and thought he could get half of my assets. Upon realizing he won't be part of the asset division, my husband was in a state of shock. Despite continued discussions, he couldn't recover from his shock. Since there wasn't much to talk about anymore, the discussion ended quickly, and I submitted the divorce papers at the city office. Our divorce was finalized without a hitch. A few months later, with the support of my parents, I went back to their home and safely gave birth to a healthy baby boy named Ethan, borrowed from the Bible. Now I spend fulfilling days with my loving child and parents. Of course, I haven't informed Jones because if I do, I'm sure Carol would barge in demanding to have my grandchild. On the other hand, Jones, who was evicted from the condo, went back to his parents' home. It seems he has become a recluse due to the shock of the easy agreement to the divorce. Occasionally, when he goes out, his appearance seems so suspicious that he often gets stopped by the cops. It appears quite pitiful. Later, I learned that the reason Jones quit his job was due to issues with interpersonal relationships. Apparently, he had a bad reputation at the office, with a habit of bad-mouthing others, especially disliked by female employees. Eventually, he was ignored by everyone, and unable to withstand such circumstances, he suddenly quit his job. It appears he might have been that kind of person even before our marriage, only showing kindness in front of me, an utterly deceptive man. 3 years later, I found myself working as the manager of a craft store. Around the time I became a regular at a local craft store, the owner approached me, proposing that I take over the store as they were considering retirement. At that time, my parents were actively helping with childcare, giving me considerable free time. I thought it might be nice to have a job to keep my hands busy. Besides, if I refused, it would inconvenience many regular customers. With these thoughts, I decided to take over the store. Today, as I was serving the occasional regular customer, an unexpected visitor arrived. Carol and Jones. "Well, a pretty nice store for you, huh?" Jones commented. Annoyed by their transparent flattery, I asked, "So, what brings you here?" Carol's response was incomprehensible, stating something about giving her grandchild back to her. It seemed Carol somehow heard that I had given birth and was considering making the child the heir. "You were already pregnant when I proposed divorce. Why did you keep it a secret?" "If I had known, I wouldn't have gone through with the divorce." Jones started blaming me. "I'd obviously kept quiet because I wanted the divorce. I knew you guys would use any means necessary to prevent the divorce if you found out I was pregnant," I retorted, glaring at Jones and Carol. When Carol asked if I was giving back her grandchild, insisting she wanted to live with the child as soon as possible, making an absurd statement about the 3 years we had been together, I stood there flabbergasted. At that moment, my parents and Ethan appeared, asking what the matter was, as they had rushed over after being notified by a regular customer. Carol, seeing Ethan holding hands with my parents, approached him, saying, "Oh, how cute. He looks just like Jones when he was a child. Look, I'm your grandma." Trying to stop her, I found Ethan declaring, "I only have one grandma," and hugging my mother. My mother asked Carol to leave, but Jones tried to forcibly take Ethan away from my parents, yelling for us to give the kid to his mother. Standing in front of Jones to protect Ethan, I was easily pushed aside due to my physical weakness. Just as Jones was about to grab Ethan's arm, my father executed a perfect shoulder throw, sending Jones flying into the air. My father, a police officer skilled in martial arts and a former national champion, showed his badge and warned Carol, ready to take necessary actions if they continued to bother us. Carol turned pale and ran away, dragging Jones with her. I never knew what became of them after that incident, and frankly, I didn't want to know. Several years later, Ethan began aspiring to become a police officer, looking up to my father. He declared, "When I grow up, I'm going to be a police officer too, so I can protect Mom." Under my father's guidance, Ethan's martial arts skills became unbeatable among his peers. I plan to continue watching over my wonderfully grown son